Good morning. It's good to see all of you online today. I'm Teresa Madsen with the OUUC Tech Team.
And Rory.
And my little ones, Rory and Finn, are here too. Welcome to all who are joining us on whatever platform you're using. This Zoom service is being recorded and it is streaming live to YouTube. We're leading worship from several locations today, so you will see the service move back and forth between us. Most of our sharing happens in the Zoom chat box, which is not posted or shared publicly. We use the chat feature for greetings, song lyrics, affirmations and applause, and items shared from the heart. We will be turning the chat on and off during the service today. We have also enabled the automated closed captioning for those of you who would like to use it. It's easy enough to alter your settings. Find the CC button at the bottom of your screen and click it to see options. You can hide subtitles or click subtitle settings to change the text size. This feature is imperfect, especially with translating song lyrics. Feel free to hide the subtitles during hymns if they're distracting. We can expect some tech glitches as we continue to do all we can to optimize our connections. If you experience any technical issues during the service, you can reach out to Joe Celine or another member of the tech team for assistance when the chat is on. We appreciate your grace as we all remember it's about connection, not perfection. Last, I hope you'll find a candle or a chalice. In a moment, we can light them together. Thank you for your grace and adaptability as we all learn together.
Good morning. Let's sing together our morning song, which is the Chant for the Seasons, hymn number 73. We're going to do the spring verse.
Good morning. Welcome to the Olympia Unitarian Universalist Congregation online worship service. The OUUC community comes together in the mutual promises and possibilities of our covenant. We commit to live out our mission to be a liberal religious community that opens minds, fills hearts, and transforms lives. We are so glad that you are here with us today. My name is Curtis Tanner. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a member of the worship arts team.
And my name is Emmy Allen. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a member of the worship arts team.
Leading worship with us today is our minister, the Reverend Mary Gear, Sarah Lewis, our Director of Community and Faith Development, and Troy Fisher, our music director. We give thanks for the tech team and OUUC media specialist Joe Celine for providing technical support today. And thanks to Darlene Sarkala, our administrator, for keeping us informed and connected. Thank you to the choir members in the Commons with Troy who are helping us sing this morning. We are grateful for the many hands that help make worship happen this morning. We welcome each of you to this celebration of love and wonder and to this congregation. After the service, we invite you to stay online for a virtual coffee chat. This is a chance to gather with a small group to say hello and check in. Each breakout room will be hosted by someone to help make sure everyone knows each other and has a chance to share. Reverend Mary will offer reflection questions to help get the conversation started. We do hope you will stay. I want to draw your attention to the order of service, which includes our announcements available on the website. Should OUUC sync up our fiscal year and program year? That's the question that a team of expert congregants, stakeholders, staff, and board members analyzed. Stay after the coffee chat today to hear the recommendation from the leaders of this auspicious group. The Books, Brownies, and Beans virtual book sale was amazingly successful. Many thanks to our enthusiastic and hardworking volunteers, to all you busy shoppers, and to our many, many generous donors. The online store closed last night, and as of Saturday afternoon, proceeds were over $8,500 and still coming in. Woohoo! The scheduled pickup today is next Saturday, March 27th at OUUC from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please watch for additional details and options in Tuesday's weekly update. Thank you, everyone, for making Books, Brownies, and Beans another success. There are many opportunities to stay connected to our community because social distancing does not mean social isolation. Please check the website regularly. If you have questions or need help, please check in with a staff member. Now, let us open our hearts and our minds as we prepare for worship. Welcome, everyone. It is good to be together.
This morning and every Sunday morning, we join Unitarian Universalist congregations around the world in lighting a chalice, the symbol of our faith tradition. Please join me as we light our chalices together with these words by Eric Walker Wickstrom. Here, today, in this space together, may we listen so that we can hear. May we hear so that we can feel. May we feel so that we can know. And may we know so that we can change ourselves and this world. May this chalice we light our way.
Good morning, everyone. Our opening words this morning are offered by the Reverend Karen Johnston, based on the words of Rebecca Parker. Let us gather together, making a place of honesty, where we commit to discover how to live among the ruins, how we might move among the ruins and find what can be saved. With our collective liberation in each of our hearts, let us gather up those materials we need to build and rebuild. Beloved community in our midst. In gathering this morning, may we be strengthened for what lies ahead. Come, let us worship together.
And let's sing together again out of the gray hymnal, hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses.
Feel the deep power of being Today's story is called The Seagull and the Garbage Dump by Erin McImris. Although Max was every inch a seagull, with beautiful white feathers, strong wings, and a curved beak made for catching fish, Max had never so much as heard of the ocean. Max had always lived in a garbage dump on the edge of town. They had learned to soar over vast hills of rotting vegetables and old furniture. Their curved beak had never tasted fish aside from what the humans threw out in their trash. And by the time that got to the dump, it was hardly ever good enough to eat. Still, life was pretty good for Max. They had plenty of friends. And since the garbage dump was the only world they had ever known, they didn't think it was all that bad. They grew up smart and resourceful, like all the seagulls at the dump. But in other ways, Max wasn't like the other birds. Max told great jokes and was deeply kind. The dump was a dangerous place. Life was hard and short. The worst danger was from traps and poisoned food left out by the humans who ran the dump. But Max's inborn kindness only deepened in this harsh world of garbage. Max was the only bird who was loved and loved by the gulls and the rats alike. But for all the good things in Max's life, they especially liked Thursdays when the trucks came to dump tons of fresh garbage. No, they also always felt like something was missing. They never quite felt at home in the dump, and yet they couldn't imagine a world outside of it. And then one day, as Max was sunning himself on the great mound of the dump, a strange smell wafted by. It was like nothing they had ever smelled before. Fresh, clean, and salty. Max's feathers shivered in recognition of what? They didn't know. Max threw himself up into the air and glided back and forth, trying to stay in the scent, trying not to lose it, whatever it was. Without even realizing it, they flew much farther than they had ever flown before. Max flew and flew and flew, hardly noticing as the garbage dump disappeared behind. A good while later, the wonderful scent began to get much stronger. Max opened their eyes wide in wonder as a powerful, fresh wind tickled their feathers. How could the air be so soft and sweet? And then, as Max flew past one last rise in the earth, before them lay an incredible vista. The setting sun, soft sand, miles and miles of waves. Birds they had never seen before danced on the surface of the undulating water. Max's heart beat hard with a feeling that they had never felt before, but later called joy. Max the seagull had found their way to the ocean. Max made friends at the ocean side, just like they had at the dump, which was a good thing because Max quickly discovered that they had a lot to learn about being a seagull. Max learned how to ride the winds, how to dive for fish, and how to charm tourists into throwing them tasty breadcrumbs. In the dump, Max had looked and sounded like a seagull, but Max wasn't truly a seagull until they found their way to the ocean. But something was still missing in Max's almost perfect life. And one night, as they sat watching the dolphins swim, Max realized what it was. Max couldn't move into their new future until they looked back at their past. So the next morning, Max flew back toward the garbage dump, guided by a much different smell than the one that had led them to the sea. They landed on top of a stinking mound and were quickly surrounded by old friends. "Where on earth have you been?" the others squawked. "Well, you're not going to believe it, but..." And then Max told them about the ocean. The other gulls were very confused. Some of them didn't believe Max. Some thought Max was just making a trick on them. None of them seemed willing to imagine that there might be another world. Still, everyone was super happy to see Max, and some decided to make the trip back to the ocean with them to see. It was strange and even scary at first, but many found that they loved this new world and wanted to change their lives. Hard times still found them there, just as it had at the dump, but they had changed for good. Max was a seagull now. They had found the ocean, and for the rest of their life, they flew back and forth between the dump and the ocean, helping other birds find their way. Thus ends our story.
We came together in community this morning, bringing all that is in our lives. In this space, we draw on the love of our community to listen deeply and hold all that we bring here with us today. If you would like to send in something to share in the Sunday service, please look for the link on the online worship page on the website, or send me an email and we'll bring it into the service next week. In this space, we share from our hearts what brings us joy and sorrow, what makes us worry and brings us delight, what makes us afraid and what makes us dance. Let's open our hearts to the complexity of life, ours and others. You will hear a drumbeat as we share today. It brings into our awareness that our individual hearts beat, and together we create the heartbeat of our community. Right now, let's take a deep breath together. In and out. As we open our hearts to receive the complexity of all that is in our lives and community today. We extend our hearts to the Asian American communities here and around the country as we once again witness racial violence again this week. We mourn with the families of the 8 victims. We grieve with those who suffer the effects of racism and misogyny in our nation. May our grief fuel our work for justice. Roger and Ann Nielsen send heartfelt thanks and appreciation for all the care and concern sent their way before, during, and after Roger's triple bypass surgery on Saturday. Roger arrived back home last Thursday and is looking forward to a steady road to full recovery. Roger and Ann say that all those good vibes sent along the way have made the road so much smoother. Roger, we are sending healing thoughts your way. I invite you now to share from your heart by entering in the chat on your screen. This is a time to share all that you wish, joys and sorrows and whatever else is shared from your heart. And as we take in what is posted, let's hear the heartbeat of our community and reach out our hearts in love and care to all those who share. I place a stone in the water for all that has been shared from the heart, a stone holding the complexity of our lives, held in the water of community. And one more stone placed in the water for all that we hold in our hearts and that remains unspoken. I invite you now into a time of reflection, prayer, and meditation. Yesterday, we marked the vernal equinox, moving into the season of spring. This prayer for the season is offered by Reverend Kathy Ryan Starr. Spirit of spring and new life, spirit of decay and death, we turn to your wisdom and strength as we seek to live lives of meaning and love. The cycle of life is powerful. Everything that lives dies. Everything that dies has lived. There is no escaping this cycle. So what then can we learn from its power? The leaves that we put away in the fall are now compost, fertilizing the soil as we prepare to till the garden for this year's plantings. That harbinger of spring, the crocus, brings such delight, unless but for a moment. Then it's gone, making way for the abundance of green and color that spring will bring. When one who was beloved dies, we cry, we mourn, we lament, and we carry them in our hearts, seeking to live as they inspired us to live. As a child grows, we marvel at their unfolding into their own unique self. These lives we live hold so much beauty and so much pain. And we, like each of our ancestors across the millennia, seek to live our lives fully. We seek love. We seek to appreciate beauty. We seek solace and healing. We seek one another, for no one can do this alone. Now, in the company of many, let us enter into a time of silence, and may this silence be a time to honor that which our heart seeks. Let's hold a moment of silence together.
Our prayers and meditations deepen our gratitude for what we know as sacred in our lives and in this world. Each Sunday, we express our gratitude by joining together in service to our community and to something greater than ourselves. The offering collected here does two things. It supports the ongoing work of OUUC, which is also supported by your regular pledges. Thank you. This offering also supports an organization that serves our community in harmony with our Unitarian Universalist values.
For March and April, our Share the Plate recipient is Grub, Garden Raised Bounty. Grub is a nonprofit organization working at the intersection of food, education, and health systems to grow healthy food, people, and communities. Grub's mission is to grow healthy food, people, and community. Grub invites OUUC to support their Wild Foods and Medicines program, Tend, Gather, and Grow. This reconnects students with our plants and animal communities, increases food access, teaches multicultural communication, and lifts up Native voices. With COVID-19, Grub has received multiple requests from local schools and Indigenous communities for outdoor educational resources. Your generous support will help continue to create and distribute at-home learning kits to local Indigenous communities, parents, and local schools. Thank you.
Please note that you can participate in the offering by making a donation online through the church website or by texting the number that will appear on your screen in just a moment. You can also mail a check to OUUC. Our community partners continue to need our financial support. May the offering now be generously given as it is gratefully received. Beautiful. Thank you for your generous gifts. Today's first reading is Surface Tension by Tess Bumbarger. Of course, there are people behaving badly during this pandemic, using it as an excuse to practice prejudice, to hoard, to blame, using it to divide and weaken us, cashing in on surface tensions for their own terrible benefit. The news daily shows these heavy things. In nature, surface tension gathers water molecules together so tightly that they form a sort of membrane across which light things can dance: leaves, insects, the wavering sun. It is why rain falls in discrete drops and babies can blow bubbles. Surface tension makes life possible. It helps collect drops along subtle edges of pine needles or leaves, run down to water roots, then help sap rise to nurture those same gatherers of sun and water. Bitter tannins in chartreuse mosses increase the tension so larger drops can form, held aloft by their fragile villi, until they can be absorbed or used to foster new life. Here's the other picture revealed by this pandemic. People are reaching out in kindness and concern to acquaintances, neighbors, strangers, creating aquifers, revealing watersheds running through the tiny capillaries of human hearts, minds, homes, streets, neighborhoods. Could the bitter tannins cause such large drops to form that we can scarcely hold them up until they can be absorbed, until we can use them to foster life? Let us open ourselves wide to gather them so we may send them to the suffering, the grieving, the caregivers, and all the workers who were always essential. Let us send them across all these spurious divisions because there is a deeper, humbler, more beautiful truth. We deeply need one another, especially now. We can pull together across distances to form a surface tension across which light can dance and which can nurture life.
Our second reading is Shaped by Our Dedication to the Values That Shape Us by Reverend Karen G. Johnston. We will get through, not unscathed to be sure. Too much has already been lost. Too many beloveds have been lost. So not unscathed, but a new kind of whole. The kind that only emerges from the going through it, from the wrestling with it, from the demanding something in exchange for what we lose, making clear what we claim, making clear what we demand in return is not personal gain or revenge, but a blessing. Shaped by our loves and our losses, our sorrows and our joys, our failures and our triumphs. A blessing shaped by our bodies and minds, by our singing and dancing, by our praying and listening, by the beauty we persist in co-creating, the justice we insist upon. A blessing shaped by our dedication to the values that shape us, unremitting compassion, a joyful and radical inclusion, a preferential option for the poor and marginalized, a deep and wide dismantling of white supremacy, honoring the great mystery of life with appreciation and humility, and with a commitment to collective liberation that frees all, a blessing for all. This ends our reading.
The global pandemic has affected everything. And isn't that an understatement? The arts and artists have suffered greatly during this time. And while the pandemic has unleashed creativity and adaptations that we would never have imagined, many of us grieve how we used to experience the arts. And perhaps none of the arts has been more mourned than the ability to make music together. Many of us have marveled at the amazing compilations of musicians in their individual Zoom boxes put together by skilled technicians. We were even more amazed to learn that it takes hundreds of hours to create just one short piece of music that way. And still, our yearning to make music together is as ancient as humanity itself. Over this past year, choirs have been especially challenged, and OUUC's choir is no different. Troy and choir members have done an amazing job of connecting by Zoom despite those challenges. The choir went online shortly after things shut down last spring and has continued since. They've learned new music, and Troy says that many have improved their singing in unexpected ways. Troy's shared this journey with me as he's learned new technology, as the choir members learned new technology, and the community stayed together, mostly. Over the past few weeks, some choir members have started gathering with Troy to sing together in the Commons as we see today. Troy's created a hybrid choir rehearsal on Wednesday evenings where most members are online and a few members are in the Commons. And rest assured, they are abiding by all of the health and safety measures outlined in the guidance for choirs and singing. 5-layer singing masks, at least 9 feet of distance, screening and signing in for contact tracing if needed. There are 2 short rehearsals with 30 minutes in between for cleaning and airing out the space. But even more remarkable than all of the logistics are the reactions that Troy has shared with me. One relatively new member entered the OUUC building for the first time ever to attend a choir rehearsal in person just a few weeks ago. They met Troy and other singers in person for the very first time. Troy has described to me the emotional release that comes with seeing others in person and making music together. The fogginess that finally clears, the flood of emotions that come, and even some tears. Some of you have described this same emotional release when you received your vaccination. The wave of emotions that includes sadness, joy, and relief. We've all been in a state of individual and collective stress for more than a year. It is no surprise that we are experiencing strong emotions and emotional release as we move through this time. Stress is defined as an external event that we experience internally with a perception of threat, and that then affects us physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Stress is an event that we experience as a threat that affects all parts of our being. Stress and trauma can be viewed as being on a continuum. We all experience stress. Our dinosaur brain responds to external events before our thinking brain even kicks in. What makes an event move from stress to trauma is our experience of it. When we are more likely to experience an event as traumatic if we also feel helpless, powerless, and without control. There are several different kinds of trauma that we might experience. There's the chronic stress and trauma that some of us experience in childhood, like abuse, neglect, poverty, and other adverse childhood events. There is the trauma that comes from a shocking event, like an accident or an assault. Then there is the chronic trauma of relationships in everyday life, such as discrimination and poverty. Black, Indigenous, and people of color have a higher baseline level of stress and trauma because we live in a racist society with systems in place to support that racism. Anyone who experiences discrimination simply has a higher baseline level of stress and trauma. Chronic stress and trauma can also come from things like sleep deprivation and overworking. And the stress is more likely to become trauma when we feel powerless to affect it. There is individual trauma, the things that we as individuals experience. And there is also collective trauma, things that we experience as a neighborhood, a community, a state, a nation, or a world. Things like war, natural disasters like fires and floods, and a pandemic. We are in a time of collective stress and trauma now. Most of us had little or no control over how or whether the virus spread. We may have done what we could to mitigate it, but we've had very little control over much of what happened, and we certainly couldn't control its existence. Our shared experience of stress and trauma of the pandemic over this past year has affected each of us differently. For those of us who have experienced trauma in other ways, childhood trauma, traumatic one-time events, or chronic oppression, the stress of this time may have been even more profound and traumatic because our internal and external resources are already maxed out. As I've said before, we are in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. We're not in the same boat when it comes to stress and trauma either. Chronic stress and trauma affects our memory and our thinking. How many of us this past year have complained about feeling foggy, distracted, unable to concentrate or focus, not knowing what day it is, unable to remember what we had for breakfast today, let alone yesterday? It's not just Zoom fatigue, it's stress and trauma fatigue. Over the past 25 years, a new paradigm has been developing that recognizes the impact of chronic stress and trauma on all of us. It's called trauma-informed care. Many professionals have adopted the principles and practices of trauma-informed care, from social work and psychiatry to the criminal justice and child welfare systems. I learned about trauma-informed care when I did a chaplaincy internship at the Oregon State Hospital in Salem, the place where the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was filmed. It's a really big place filled with stress and trauma. The principles of trauma-informed care are straightforward. It asks professionals to consider the role that trauma and lingering traumatic stress play in the lives of the people they serve. We know that when we are stressed, we tend to return to our old ways of being and doing, things that might have helped us survive at one time, but might not serve us so well now. Often behavior that seems nonsensical and even destructive makes some sense when viewed in the context of trauma. For example, someone who seems unable to take even a small step to help themselves may be suffering from a lifetime of oppression that has taught them that it doesn't matter what they do, the discrimination will continue. Trauma has impaired their innate ability to care for themselves. A trauma-informed approach asks professionals to consider how they might behave to avoid adding new stress. How can they better help people heal? How can policies, practices, procedures, and environments be created to support those who have experienced trauma? This approach considers age, culture, gender, and other identities that make a difference, as does the setting and the context. And this approach seeks to create safety, transparency, trustworthiness, support, collaboration, empowerment, and choice, all the things that stress and trauma take away. I hear our OUUC 7 principles in these trauma-informed care principles: inherent worth and dignity, finding truth and meaning, and connection. When I served at the state hospital, I often reflected on what it would mean to perform trauma-informed ministry. And over this past year, as we've lived through a pandemic, I've been wondering what it might be like if we lived trauma-informed lives. What if we lived our lives with the principles of trauma-informed care, assuming that we have all experienced stress and perhaps trauma, so need safety, transparency, trust, collaboration, and empowerment? This past year, it has become even more apparent that each of us brings some level of stress and trauma to our relationships, some more and some less. But now we have one big shared experience of stress and trauma. We don't know what else people may have experienced in their lives. We do know that all of us have been affected in some way by this pandemic. I believe that our most pressing theological question is this: with the realization that we are all connected, even more so now, how are we to be together? As we begin to reconnect in person, we'll have to relearn how to be together again. We'll have to learn how to communicate again. We'll have to learn how to trust each other again. We have been changed, and how we were together may not serve us as we gather together again. We have all experienced chronic stress, and for some of us, trauma. If we were to live trauma-informed lives, how might we treat ourselves? How might we treat others? We might ask, how can we make space for and welcome the emotional release that we will feel? How can we help create safety and support for everyone? How can we empower each other, build mutuality, and provide choice? There are suggestions for how individuals can begin to control stress and trauma. Things like setting boundaries to get rest and rejuvenation. We are most resilient when we are rested. Things like slowing down to give ourselves time to process the experiences and emotions that we've had, grieving for what has been and what we have lost. Keeping human connection and moving our bodies, focusing on what we do have control over, and taking action in positive ways, noticing simple pleasures and gratitude. And as a community, we can also support each other as we move into the next phase of the pandemic. We aren't done yet, and the pandemic is not done with us. If we are to live among the ruins, as the reading today said, we need strength for what lies ahead. And just like Max the seagull, we can help each other find our way. We can offer grace to ourselves and to each other, and we can remind each other to slow down and to process the emotions. Based on what we have experienced, our past, we can create a new kind of wholeness as individuals and wholeness as a community. It will be a wholeness that comes from struggle and wrestling with what has been and with what is. We can make meaning together. We can grieve together, and we can celebrate together. We are still here. And this is the work of our congregational community. We have been changed. We need each other now more than ever. As we reopen and rebuild our relationships and our world, I invite you to consider what values you want to bring into this new world. What practices will help you recognize how you've been affected? And what will help remind you of your values and how you want to be? Let's bring these questions into a time of silence together.
Let's join together in singing hymn number 1028, The Fire of Commitment.
When our hunger
Please join me as we extinguish our chalices with these words from the Reverend Scott Taylor. In the end, they will know our commitments by our actions. They will measure our legacy by our loyalty to the long haul. Our strength lies in the willingness to bear the burdens of others. Our love lives on to the degree that we choose to offer it when the offering isn't easy. So let us choose wisely with great intention and care, knowing that it is not simply we who make promises, our promises also make us. May we move in peace.
Let's join together in singing our unison benediction. How bountiful the blessings that surround us. We come together grateful to be one. As we go forth and greet the days unwinding, the circle grows as pebbles thrown to one, and all that Spirit guides us on our pathways, abiding in our hearts the bond of love.
Please stay online if you'd like to join in virtual coffee and conversation. You'll see an invitation pop up that will invite you to join a breakout room. Please introduce yourself to anyone you don't know, and thank you for building community today. If you're new to OUUC, we'd love to hear from you. You can fill out a visitor card at the link in the chat. If you're not planning to stay for the coffee